In these East Tennessee counties, and in all the counties of East Tennessee, population change is literally a fact of life. Babies are born, people die, people move away, new people move in. The result is net population change, which affects housing, commercial development, transportation, commuter patterns, the economy, and the environment. We know more change is on the way in the next 20 years, whether we like it or not. Can we accommodate that change with both sustainable land use and quality of life in East Tennessee? Well, that's a question for Plain Talk on Quality Growth.
Well, in the 16-county East Tennessee Development District region, the population has increased continuously from 1950 to 2000, even beyond that, into 2005, the newest estimates we have. The reason for that population increase is varied. We have two components. One is natural increase, which is the difference between births and deaths in the region, and the other one is net migration, that is the difference between people coming in and out of the region. Now, in the 1950s, the population increase was rather low, but it was fueled by the baby boom. It was fueled by natural increase. There was actually a lot of people leaving the region back in the 1950s and even in the 1960s as the economy transitioned from basically agriculture to manufacturing and service industries and so forth. In the 1970s, the region took off. It actually had a very dramatic reversal. Population then was driven by net migration. Natural increase had been declining after the baby boom was over, and that continued into a little bit into the 1980s. There was a lull there. We didn't grow as much in the 1980s, but then we took off again very dramatically in the 1990s. So from 1990 to 2000, we probably had the biggest growth in this region historically that we've ever had, and it was fueled by new people coming into the region. People have a tendency to buy away from their employment, and that sometimes is called sprawl. There is some effect of that. You have to get into your car to go to work, you have to get into your car to go to school, you have to get into your car to go to church, you have to get into your car to go shopping. And those kind of individual decisions have impact.
What we've seen in the past is growth patterns that duplicate what's happened historically, is using up farmland, growing out into what they call the green fields, and there are limits on how much of that you can do. And what we're trying to do is grow in a different way, to sort of regrow what we have. And what we have is old industrial sites, like the South Waterfront. We have brownfield sites, we have old, what some people call grayfield sites, old commercial sites, strip malls, etc., that have outlived their useful lifespan. And that's what we're doing more and more, and what we're trying to do in Knoxville, and we're seeing this in other communities around the region too, is use those old sites and redevelop them in the core of our urban centers and the core of our population areas, so that you bring new vitality and you don't have the problems you do in terms of infrastructure, delivery of services that you see out in the periphery. Where I'm standing now is in the midst of the City View project, which is the first new project to come out of the South Waterfront planning and redevelopment effort. And that's an example, I think, an excellent example of where we can go and where we should look at going in our region. We have these opportunity sites that are in the core of our older communities. This happens to be an old industrial site, and that use is gone. It's in the past. And so now we have an area where people want to come. Being by the water is attractive. We've got lots of sites in our region that are by the water. We have a place that it's close to downtown. It's in the heart of this vibrant urban area that's growing and being redeveloped. And so here's our opportunity to rebuild what we have, to redevelop and regrow in the very heart of our community. And that's really what we want to do here.
Change is both the hope and dread of many in East Tennessee. Hope for the promise of economic growth and a better life, alternating with dread of threatening change. How East Tennessee handles change is one reason this is a region with a character all its own.
Well, I think first of all, we have to understand what East Tennessee is. It's a culture. It's a culture of a mixture of the land and the people and that history. And when you mix them all together in the particular mixture that we did, East Tennessee emerged. It emerged probably just a little bit before the Civil War. The major change that East Tennessee saw between what you could call the pre-modern period and the modern period was the coming of the railroad. When the railroad came, then East Tennessee could connect itself both south to Charleston and Savannah and northward into Richmond and, of course, the Northeast. And that was what broke the isolation and made things really begin to happen. In 1900, for example, East Tennesseans raised corn and wheat, cattle. Tobacco hadn't come to East Tennessee just yet, and it would be a couple of decades before tobacco would really catch on. But in rural East Tennessee, in the early part of the 20th century, what East Tennessee really raised was children. The largest families of any counties in the state and of most counties in the nation, in spite of the fact that the infant mortality rate, children that failed to reach the age of 5, exceeded that of modern-day Pakistan. In Sevier County, where I live, 26% of all the deaths recorded for 1 year for which we have records were children who failed to reach the age of 1. But in spite of that horrible mortality, the population was growing so fast that farms couldn't be divided anymore. Sevier County in 1860 had 900 farms. By 1900, it had 3,000 farms with no increase in acreage. And so these young men and women had to leave those regions, not because they wanted to, but because they had to.
It was the people who came into the cities from the rural areas who provided the muscle and backbone that was the missing link for the industrialization of East Tennessee. Labor was what the factories and wholesaling houses needed to succeed. But now that the workers were here, industry's solution was the city's problem: how to provide city services for all those new neighborhoods.
Well, development followed the population shift in some interesting ways. As whites and African Americans moved into these towns and cities to get these jobs, you began to see what would be the first, I think, part of real need for towns and cities to come to grips with exploding populations, with public health, with city streets, with public education, with all these other things. And whether they could do it or not could spell the success or failure of those cities. The problem arose really from East Tennessee culture, where many East Tennesseans believed that government had only one purpose, and that was to steal your money. And so the answer was, don't give them anything to steal. Have the taxes as low as possible and just have a regular rotation of office. Just throw the people we're stealing out and give someone else a chance to rob you. Now, what that's going to mean for streets, education, public health, and all the other things, I leave it to your imagination. It meant that these cities were held back. East Tennessee towns and cities were the way they were because people wanted them to be the way they are.